Welcome back to Data Driven Recruiting. I'm your host, Sophia, and today we have a special guest, Elliot Garms, the founder of Humanpredictions. Hi, Elliot.
Hi, Sophia. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being on the show. For our listeners, could you briefly share kind of your background and also what Humanpredictions is about?
Of course. My background is mostly all in tech recruiting. I actually grew up, both of my parents were recruiters. I was around recruiting. So I got into recruiting working for the family business in high school, doing sourcing primarily. And that kind of taught me the ropes of recruiting, led me into really starting my own boutique tech recruiting agency. That was very focused on placing software developers, designers, people in the tech space in Chicago. And I did a quick stint out of recruiting with Dev Bootcamp when we helped launch Dev Bootcamp's second location here in Chicago. And my role at Dev Bootcamp was really on the careers side of the bootcamp and helping make sure the students learning to code and going through the program were able to find work on the back end. So most all tech recruiting and a little bit in the coding bootcamp education space, which was amazing, but really doing tech recruiting in that space as well. Now I am working on Humanpredictions, which is a tech-focused recruiting tool. Really, the main thing we're solving is a lot of the tech world is moving away from LinkedIn and not volunteering as much data to LinkedIn profiles, not checking in mails, really just not using LinkedIn to the extent a lot of people used to. And it's creating a lot of challenges for tech recruiters who have relied and used LinkedIn for a long time. And so the main thing we're doing at Humanpredictions is gathering public data from sites like GitHub, Stack Overflow, Meetup, and then dozens of niche tech sites, Kaggle, Dribbble, Behance, NPM, Ruby Gems, different open source communities, using all of these sites and communities to identify interesting tech talent and also have meaningful enough data on those people that you can reach out to them, with good messaging and with opportunities that are actually relevant for them. So background in all tech recruiting and now working on software for tech recruiters.
I see. Yeah. No, I mean so if I understand correctly, it's a kind of a predictive analytics applied to finding candidates and also determining the relevancy of the job that you're looking for, as well as the candidate, so that you can have a better kind of engagement when you do reach out. And it's also really interesting that you mentioned that, since you've been in the tech industry recruiting, for a while, the shift in behaviors, LinkedIn becoming, at first the most kind of incumbent player, and then it becoming getting too noisy and too much information, and then losing interest and people moving away. And there needs to be a new solution to kind of help bridge that gap, basically, right? Yeah. So that's really interesting. Could you tell us a little bit more about like when you started kind of noticing that change in behavior, like moving away from LinkedIn especially for engineers and tech recruiting purposes? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I did also do a recruiting stint at Groupon where I was doing some tech recruiting for Groupon in Chicago. And I think that's really when I started to notice, LinkedIn. Being a tech recruiter my whole life, I've lived on LinkedIn, but I think around 2012, I actually met a guy named Pete Kazanji who was running a company called Talent Bin. And I had always been, a sourcing nerd and always really into writing my own strings onto to X-ray search LinkedIn.
Yeah.
But when Pete showed me Talent Bin in 2012, I immediately lit up and just saw a lot of interesting people in Chicago that I knew. But he was using things like GitHub to build out profiles, and it was just a lot of interesting data as well as interesting people I wasn't seeing on the same LinkedIn searches I was doing. And that's, really when I started to notice, the industry is so competitive. There's so many people trying to recruit engineers that the engineers are starting to kind of hide on LinkedIn or even obfuscate their profiles by having, silly titles or things that would maybe deter recruiters from
just finding them.
So yeah, I
it's
think
kind of like the opposite of search engine optimization. It's like search engine de-optimization to hide. That's really interesting. The Talent Bean, which was acquired by Monster.com, I guess, had a lot of, I think, similar idea in terms of scraping the web and being able to make sense of the thing. And I remember meeting Pete and then him talking about it as well. So you already noticed that like back in 2012, and what I'm also curious is, as you started providing these services with a human prediction, and it sounds like it's more than just identifying the candidates, but also there is an engagement part and matching part. I love how you're at the forefront of the technology and finding new ways to do it, but how has been the reception on the industry among the recruiters? Are they getting it, and are they seeing the value right away, or is there a little more, some are willing to take the risk and then try out the new tool, but then others are still like, I'm still gonna be the LinkedIn person. How has that been?
Yeah, no, it's definitely been split. We have a lot of people that are excited to try new technology, and that's great for us. But we also have people that, especially in recruiting, are maybe stuck in their old ways and hesitant to change. And I think our software, our product does require quite a bit of a behavior change, in that we really believe less is more. I kind of say it's, we're a spear fishing tool, not a net fishing tool, but a lot of what we focus on is really getting away from quote unquote spamming. I think it's one of the core, high level problems within tech recruiting is just a lot of transactional template messages. And so I think that's a big place where we're really trying to help our users is finding, writing way more advanced searches to find much shorter lists of candidates, but shorter lists that they can connect with and engage with in a much more meaningful way. So yeah, I think.
Yeah. So then it is a behavior change, because it's like from like, oh, this is all numbers game, and the net approach like spread and pray. Some of them will convert and some of them might not, but like I go by number, versus being more almost like in the marketing, the account-based marketing approach. Like I know exactly who I want to target. I'm gonna spend more time per candidate, but it will be more meaningful. And here you also kind of I think the underlying assumption here is that spamming doesn't work, and actually the more personalized and human connection works better. Could you explain a little more why you think it works better? And have you kind of been able to discuss with the numbers like how more effective this one is?
Yeah. So we, a lot of the data is from our clients, and so we don't have a ton of ability or access to a lot of data that's not ours. But I think we definitely believe spamming doesn't work, and we're definitely seeing a lot of data that supports that, really just in response rates simply of, messages that are really personalized and personalized off of multiple factors, not just one language or keyword. And I think tech especially, but I think just as humans, we're in this kind of end of an era where all this transactional email. Like I say to our clients, like when you check your email in the morning, you know darn well what is a real email that a human wrote to you and what is, these campaigns and these templates and these,
right. Automated ones.
The developers definitely know. Like you can't think that you're like putting one by them and have this clever, like everyone know when you have a real message and when you don't. And the engineers are so inundated that yes, I'm sure, a spam message at the right time is, assuming it's got all the right stuff in it, could still get responses. Don't get me wrong. But the big trend I see is that engineers don't want anything to do with these kind of, clickbait email buzzword, hey, we matched one buzzword on your LinkedIn profile. That's why you're getting this email.
Right.
I think that the tech folks can smell that from a mile away, and they seem to be very much at a point where it's just a non-starter. They're going to delete or archive that email. Whereas when you can say, hey, Sophia, I saw Pete Kazanji from TalentBin. Pete's been a mentor to me and helped us with Human Predictions. I've seen a bunch of cool stuff around Code Signal. I'd love to introduce, but when you can start mentioning real humans that are mutual connections, when you can cite real research I've done on whatever you're working on, that's when, as on the receiving end as a human, you're like, okay, this person has taken time to really do research and
get to know me.
Exactly. Yeah. And so
I'm not one of the 1,000 people that he's just, putting into the system, but like he showed the respect and care, and it deserves kind of a reply, at least like, hey, let's talk in a month from now. I'm too busy, but like a response instead of like, also, as a receiving end, if you know that it's like, automated email, like you also like, I don't own any replies, right? It's like so easy to just like toss it and not feel bad about it.
Yep. Yeah. And I think there's not a ton of value in people that are sending those messages. They don't really have a network, and it's the engineers market. And I think the engineers are open to having relationships with interesting talent people, interesting recruiting people that have access to interesting opportunities. But what's the value of having some run-of-the-mill recruiter that sends spam? And so I think that's the other thing we're seeing shift, is not really reaching out to engineers about just an opportunity right now, but hey, we do a lot in machine learning. I see you're very active in the local machine learning community here in Chicago. How have we not crossed paths? We want to just know you. We want you to know of our, it's really going in that direction of building relationships with people before you want to recruit them. And if you want to be able to recruit good people, that's becoming really the only way, is you have to put in some time up front to get to know them or build a relationship. Right. They don't just answer a random email and change jobs typically.
Yeah. Right. And I think that's very important point, because as we have more tools and more automations and more, just things that's taken care of, and that allows us to, cover a lot wider volume. But at the end of the day, what recruiter separately from recruiting tool can really do is like that, like understanding the other human, empathizing it, understanding what the career goal for this person is, and really developing that relationship, right? Because, otherwise, like any recruiters can be just replaced with a machine, right? If the automation just can take over and really effective. But I think, we also forget, maybe because there is such a widespread of machine and tools and automation, like the role of a recruiter is becoming actually more important, that they have a human connection and relationship building. And I think that's a really great point you mentioned. Kind of a changing topic a little bit. So you mentioned that there is also not just like identifying like, oh, here are people who might change jobs and having signals, but you also mentioned that kind of about finding the right people for the particular teams. how do you think about the relevancy? Like, what is the right candidate for a certain job? How do you kind of figure that out at scale?
It's a great, the $1 million question. I think the way we're approaching it is, let's be completely objective with all the data we collect and present, and try and be very meticulous with how we organize that data and make it searchable for our customers.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't really do any ranking or saying this person is better than that person. We leave those opinions up to our clients, who hopefully can use the very rich data we've collected to
Mm-hmm.
say, we think Sophia is better than Elliot for this role for X, Y, and Z. But we feel very strongly that, the best platform engineer at Facebook might not be as exciting of a candidate for Netflix or for another company, and the best to one might not be. So we don't do anything
Mm-hmm.
uniform with ranking or kind of making someone more senior per se. Really what we want to do is look at, what's Sophia doing across GitHub, across Stack Overflow, what meetups is she in? Has she published anything? And just, again, presenting that data in more of a raw form to our users to say, hey, we're actually really into building a new engineering team that, is led by a female engineering leader. So now we're looking for, female engineering leaders, and we think someone that has spoke at a conference or spoke at meetups could be great to build that team around. So now we're using Humanpredictions to look for, female candidates that have spoken at a conference or active in meetups.
Mm-hmm.
But that's, an example of the company is the one to come up with, this is what's important to us. And it's our job to just have all that data well organized and well searched, easy to search for the customer. And then it's up to them to kind of put in their own. So I think that is really our approach, is let's just, our job is to organize the data and let our customers search for whatever is important to them.
Mm-hmm.
But let's not get into playing God or saying these people are better than those people. So yeah,
that's
that's
interesting. I mean, it's kind of like, a lot of things you mentioned actually reminds me of Google, right? We're going to be organizing the data and show and let the users figure out what is actually useful to them. And I mean, that itself is, not only $1 million, but it could be $1 trillion idea how you can think about that. But yeah, that's also interesting to hear that it's not just the GitHub like code and just analyzing that, but more, it can be even bigger scope. Because what I, being part of a code signal where it's an assessment tool. We only assess the technical skills. We don't necessarily assess the other portion. But when you're making a hiring decision for a technical role, skills is a very important part, right? If you cannot do the job, then the qualification doesn't meet. But that's not sufficient alone, right? Like the best technical skill for that role alone doesn't necessarily make the candidate best fit, right? There is other component that code signal is not necessarily trying to assess or even trying to do, but we do tell our customers, there are many parts in making hiring decision, and skills is important, but like we only do skills, and then that's your job to also figure out what other things that makes this candidate important, like teamwork or like passion for a certain technology or certain issues or certain things. I think that makes the more holistic hiring decision. And it's interesting to hear that you not only just look at that, but trying to gather any possible data that's out there that can inform the recruiter about the holistic picture of the who this candidate is. So that's really, really interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think one of the coolest trends right now with the pandemic is everything has gone so remote that we've seen everyone no longer searching in one specific market and now searching across all of North America, but layering in, hey, we're a tech startup working on climate change, being able to find the engineers that have the skill set around Python, which is relevant for this climate change startup, but also looking at who are the Python engineers that write about climate change or are active in climate change groups. And that is like how I think we're doing really cool data-driven recruiting, way more so than our predictions, is helping customers find, the list of 30 Python engineers that are active in climate groups and publishing climate stuff, but then going to those 30 and saying, hey, we're doing this around climate change. We saw you did that. That's how we're helping our customers find interesting people and get really good engagement is as we go to these larger kind of remote markets where you could search across all of North America, the ability to layer in the kind of other softer things like climate change or fitness or whatever those other interests, but there's companies that align with all those things. And so
it's really interesting because I think we had in a couple episodes ago the economist and researcher at Indeed, and she's also just economics professor and looking at the job data, and she mentioned how with the COVID, location used to define what the job market is, right? The boundaries of the local job market, but that has been kind of lifted. And as you open up the pool of the candidates, now you can actually lay your own other relevant stuff that, you might not realistically be able to do because there are only 5 people in the whole US that can fit that category. And if you limit it to your location, maybe there is 0, but now there is 5. And, that's like a big kind of a new trend that people can now able to really incorporate into their hiring. So that's really interesting.
I think it also is super aligned with what the engineering and tech side is very receptive to, is when there's that layered research that really takes you to a small group. Those also tend to be the engagements where you will hear back from candidates and get good response rates. Whereas if you're just going after a group of everyone that knows a particular language, that doesn't have a ton of substance. Whereas, layering in some of these other things finds a really interesting group that, in the broader market, you'll have more people to talk to. But I think it also gets much better engagement and response rates for the recruiters that are looking for people in this type of way.
Well, I hope that Humanpredictions can help a lot of the recruiters really get that, take advantage of this approach and have an edge and differentiate themselves from others who are not yet adapting, right? Because technology at the end is can be a really helpful tool. So that's really exciting. As a last question, which I started to ask everyone who's on the show is, who is someone you respect a lot in the industry, whether, practitioners like recruiters or people who are developing, solutions like yours? Who should I have on this app? In podcast next? Who do you respect that I should just go and reach out, make sure that they are on this podcast? Is that Pete question. Or is it someone else? Or
Pete would be awesome. I would love to hear from Pete. I think a big influence on me that I think had a huge influence on what has become Humanpredictions is a guy named Glenn Caffey. He is really just an expert on all things sourcing, but he has run a blog for many years called Boolean Black Belt. But I think he's a very interesting person. A few years ago, I was lucky enough to be on a panel with Kieran Snyder from Textio. But she's someone that I follow around and learn a lot from, and she's putting out a lot of cool content and doing a lot of cool stuff with her product at Textio. So I think those would be a couple off the top of my head that would be fun to see on here.
Yeah, and I'll definitely reach out and say, Elliot wants you to be on the show. Let's talk.
Cool. Well, do
Yeah,
so. Please do.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time today and sharing a lot of insights about, how the whole tech recruiting space is shaping, and also your experience in recruiting and also building human predictions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me on. It was a lot of fun chatting with you, and appreciate you having me on as a guest.
Yeah. Thank you. And and thanks for joining us today. For more tips and insights on data-driven recruiting, please go to ddr.codesignal.com. We'll see you next time.